In the quiet depths of Belle Plaine State Forest, there are secrets that even time itself struggles to keep hidden. On a cold December afternoon, a discovery shattered the silence of this vast expanse of trees and shadows. A refrigerator, weathered, wrapped tightly in a sleeping bag, secured with blue ratchet straps, stood out among the pines like a haunting monument. Inside, a truth too dark to ignore was waiting to be uncovered. The lifeless body of 26-year-old Azariah Stone was found sealed within that refrigerator. A young woman, full of dreams and hope, reduced to a tragic secret hidden in plain sight. What could lead to such a horrific end? The answers lie in a story that begins months earlier. A story of love, manipulation, control, and the devastating consequences of misplaced trust. At the center of it all is Cohen Donovan, a 45-year-old contractor from New Jersey. By all appearances, he was a man of simple ambitions. But appearances can deceive. What began as a whirlwind romance between Cohen and Azariah quickly unraveled into a nightmare of violence and betrayal. Their relationship would lead to one of the most shocking cases the small towns of New Jersey had ever seen. As we uncover the chain of events leading to Azariah's tragic end, we'll examine not just the crime itself, but the choices, relationships, and circumstances that turned her life into a cautionary tale. This is not a simple story of good and evil. It is a reflection of the fragile line between trust and danger, love and control, life and death. This is the story of Azariah Stone, a young woman with her entire life ahead of her, and the man who claimed to love her but ultimately brought her to ruin. What led Cohen Donovan to such a horrifying act? And what can we learn from the tragic mistakes that brought Azariah to her final resting place? Stay with me as we delve into a story of betrayal, heartbreak, and the chilling discovery that ended one life and shattered many others. This is the true story of how a romance in New Jersey took a dark turn, ending in a forest, inside a refrigerator, and leaving behind questions that still haunt those who knew Azariah best. Before we go into the details of the story, please note that this video contains true crime content, including themes of violence and betrayal, which some viewers may find distressing. While the events are based on a real case, some names and details have been altered to protect the privacy of those involved. This content is intended for educational and informational purposes, helping to explore the complexities of justice and human behavior. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Before Azariah Stone became the name whispered in news reports and the subject of headlines about tragedy, she was a vibrant young woman with big dreams. She wasn't just a victim in a chilling crime. She was someone who mattered deeply to those who knew and loved her. To understand the weight of her loss, we must first understand who she was before her life was cut short. Azariah was born on a crisp autumn day in 1997, in a quiet corner of Runnymede, New Jersey. From a young age, she stood out, not in a loud, attention-grabbing way, but through the quiet charm of her creativity. Those who knew her best described her as a dreamer, an artist at heart. She could take the most ordinary moments and turn them into something extraordinary, whether through a sketch on the corner of a napkin or a candid photo she'd snap with her thrift store camera. She had a way of finding beauty where others might overlook it. But beneath her free spirit and warm smile was someone who had faced her share of struggles. Her parents, Linda Cantu and Moses Knapp, separated when Azariah was only 10 years old. The divorce left deep emotional cracks in her foundation, and she spent much of her adolescence bouncing between her mother's house in Runnymede and her father's apartment in nearby Camden. Despite the challenges, Azariah remained resilient, clinging to her art as a way to process the chaos around her. In her early 20s, life became even more complicated. After graduating high school, Azariah set her sights on becoming a professional artist, hoping to one day open her own small studio. But dreams don't always pay the bills. She worked a series of odd jobs, waitressing at diners, taking on freelance design gigs, even babysitting on the weekends, just to make ends meet. Money was always tight, and when the pandemic hit, Azariah's financial struggles grew heavier. She was forced to move back home with her mother, Linda, to regroup and figure out her next steps. It wasn't the future she had imagined for herself, but she held on to the belief that better days were ahead. Those close to her remember her as kind and fiercely loyal. Her best friend, Amelie Person, recalls how Azariah always had a way of making people feel seen. She could tell if something was wrong just by looking at you, Amelie said during a tearful interview. She'd drop everything to help you, even if she was struggling herself. Azariah's younger brother, Braylon Gentry, spoke of her as both a sister and a protector. "She was my rock," he said. "She'd sneak into my room when I had nightmares as a kid and tell me everything would be okay. She made you believe it, even when she wasn't sure it was true herself." Azariah was also someone who loved love. She often wrote about her romantic ideals in her diary, filling the pages with sketches of imaginary couples walking hand in hand or sitting together beneath trees. In one entry, written about a year before she met Cohen Donovan, she described what she was looking for in a partner. "I just want someone who sees me, like really sees me, not someone who wants to change me or mold me into their version of who I should be, but someone who loves the messy, imperfect me." That's not asking too much, is it? Her friends would later say that Azariah had a tendency to see the good in people, even when it wasn't there. She trusted easily, sometimes too easily, and forgave even when forgiveness wasn't deserved. It was one of her most beautiful traits, but also one of the most dangerous. And perhaps, in some ways, it was this unshakable faith in others that led her to Cohen Donovan. When Azariah first met Cohen at a local bar in the spring of 2022, she thought she had finally found someone who could offer her the stability and companionship she longed for. He was older, more experienced, and carried himself with a confidence she found comforting. In the beginning, he seemed attentive, supportive, and charming. Everything she believed a partner should be. Cohen made her feel special, showering her with compliments and small gifts. In one text to Amelie shortly after they started dating, Azariah gushed, "He's not like the guys my age. He actually listens to me. I think this could be something real." But while Azariah's friends were happy to see her smiling again, some couldn't shake the feeling that something about Cohen didn't sit right. He was quick to insert himself into her life, slowly taking up more of her time and space. Linda, her mother, later admitted that she wasn't a fan of Cohen from the start. He seemed possessive, like he always had to know where she was or who she was talking to. "I told her to be careful, but she'd just laugh and say I was worrying too much." For Azariah, though, Cohen felt like a safe harbor in a stormy world. And maybe, in her heart, she believed that if she could make this relationship work, it would be a step toward the life she'd always dreamed of. A life filled with love, art, and peace. She wanted so desperately to believe in him. But as we'll soon see, not every belief is rewarded. Sometimes, trusting the wrong person can have consequences far beyond what anyone could imagine. Cohen Donovan's story is a reminder that darkness often wears a mask. On the surface, he appeared to be a man with his life in order, hardworking, confident, and full of charm. But beneath that exterior was a troubled man with a past marked by failure, control, and deeply rooted insecurities. A man who, over time, would reveal himself to be far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. Cohen was born in Gloucester City, New Jersey, in 1978, the oldest of three boys. His father, Moses Knapp, worked in construction, and Cohen grew up watching him build houses, roads, and bridges. Those who knew the family said Moses was strict and rarely showed affection, expecting perfection from his sons. Cohen, eager to win his father's approval, carried those lessons into adulthood. Work hard, take control, and never let anyone see your weaknesses. But this relentless pursuit of control would follow Cohen into every relationship he formed, and eventually, it would destroy lives. After graduating high school, Cohen followed in his father's footsteps and became a contractor. By his early 20s, he was running his own small construction business, doing roofing, repairs, and custom builds for clients across New Jersey. On the surface, his life seemed stable, even enviable. He married his high school sweetheart, Linda Cantu, when he was just 22, and the couple settled in Gloucester City. But behind closed doors, their marriage was anything but happy. Friends of Linda later revealed that Cohen had a volatile temper, often lashing out over small disagreements. And as the years went on, his need for control began to smother their relationship. By the time Cohen turned 30, he had been through 2 divorces. Both of his ex-wives accused him of being controlling and emotionally abusive, though Cohen denied these claims, blaming the breakups on what he called bad matches. He insisted he was the victim of women who didn't understand him or who, as he put it, weren't supportive enough. His personal life was unraveling, but Cohen managed to maintain an outward image of confidence. To his clients and acquaintances, he was still the charismatic contractor who could talk his way into a deal and leave you smiling while he did it. But as Cohen's personal life fell apart, so did his finances. By his early 40s, his business was struggling to stay afloat. He was in and out of court over unpaid debts, and his credit was in shambles. Those who worked with him began to notice cracks in his charm. He became more irritable, more paranoid, and less reliable. But for Cohen, failure wasn't something he could accept. He clung to the image of himself as the man in control, no matter how far from the truth that might have been. When Cohen met Azariah Stone in the spring of 2022, he was 45, nearly twice her age. By then, he had learned how to use his charm to draw people in, and Azariah was no exception. To her, Cohen represented everything she was looking for: stability, maturity, and someone who could make her feel safe. And Cohen, in turn, was drawn to Azariah for her youth and energy, a stark contrast to the struggles and failures that weighed heavily on him. In the beginning, Cohen played the role of the perfect partner. He showered Azariah with attention, flattery, and gifts. He told her she was different from anyone he'd ever met, that she made him feel alive again. In a text to a friend, Azariah wrote, "He's so attentive. He notices things about me that no one else does. I think I've finally found someone who gets me." But what Azariah didn't see at the time was that Cohen's attentiveness wasn't rooted in love. It was rooted in control. He was watching her closely, learning her vulnerabilities, and slowly weaving himself into every corner of her life. As the weeks turned into months, Cohen's true nature began to emerge. What started as concern quickly became possessiveness. He would question Azariah about her whereabouts, her friends, and even her social media activity. At first, she brushed it off as a sign that he cared, telling her friends, "He's just protective. It's kind of sweet, really." But soon, his behavior became harder to ignore. Cohen would get angry if she didn't respond to his texts immediately. He began discouraging her from seeing her friends, saying they didn't have her best interests at heart. Slowly but surely, he was isolating her. By the fall of 2022, Azariah's world had begun to shrink. She was spending most of her time with Cohen, often at his insistence. When she tried to set boundaries or make plans without him, he would accuse her of not caring about their relationship. "Do you even love me?" he'd ask during arguments. And when Azariah would try to pull away, Cohen would turn on the charm again, apologizing profusely and promising to do better. It was a cycle that left her feeling confused and trapped. Friends and family began to notice the change in Azariah. She seemed more withdrawn, less like the vibrant, creative person they knew. Her best friend, Amelie Person, recalled a conversation in which Azariah admitted she was starting to feel suffocated by Cohen's behavior. "She told me he was getting more controlling, but she didn't want to give up on him," Amelie said. "She thought if she just loved him enough, he'd change." Azariah's mother, Linda, echoed those concerns. "She stopped coming around as much," Linda said. "And when she did, she seemed nervous, like she was afraid to say too much." Cohen's manipulation wasn't limited to emotional control. He began inserting himself into Azariah's financial decisions, insisting on helping her budget and even offering to manage some of her bills. On the surface, it seemed like he was trying to support her, but in reality, he was tightening his grip. By making her financially dependent on him, Cohen ensured that leaving him would be even more difficult. It wasn't until the summer of 2023 that the cracks in their relationship became impossible to ignore. Neighbors would later report hearing loud arguments coming from Cohen's house, sometimes late into the night. Police were called on at least 2 occasions, but no charges were filed. For Azariah, the relationship that had once felt like a dream was becoming a nightmare. But even as things deteriorated, Cohen refused to let her go. Cohen-Donovan's story is one of control, manipulation, and the need to dominate those around him. For years, he had hidden these traits behind a mask of charm and confidence. But with Azariah, his mask began to slip. What started as a whirlwind romance had turned into something toxic, something dangerous. And by the time Azariah realized the full extent of who Cohen was, it was already too late. What began as a seemingly perfect romance between Cohen-Donovan and Azariah Stone had started to show cracks just a few months into their relationship. Those closest to Azariah had seen subtle signs of trouble early on, but she brushed off their concerns, convinced that Cohen's flaws were temporary. She was determined to make it work. But by mid-2023, those cracks had grown into gaping fissures that could no longer be ignored. What started as jealousy and possessiveness had spiraled into something far darker. Something Azariah would later describe to her best friend as terrifying. The first months of their relationship had felt like a fairy tale. Cohen lavished Azariah with attention, making her feel like she was the center of his world. He texted her good morning every day, planned surprise dates, and constantly reminded her of how lucky he was to have found her. But as time passed, Cohen's charm began to take on a sharper edge. His compliments were occasionally followed by backhanded remarks, subtle digs that chipped away at Azariah's confidence. If she dressed up to go out with friends, he'd comment, "Who are you trying to impress?" If she didn't respond to his texts quickly enough, he'd ask, "Are you too busy talking to someone else?" At first, Azariah laughed off these remarks, chalking them up to Cohen being protective. But over time, his behavior became harder to ignore. By the summer of 2022, the first clear red flags began to emerge. Azariah's friends noticed that she was spending less time with them and more time with Cohen. It wasn't just that she was busy with her new relationship. Cohen actively discouraged her from seeing them. He'd tell her that her friends didn't really care about her or that they were jealous of their relationship. In one particularly telling instance, Azariah canceled a long-planned girls' night after Cohen accused her of abandoning him. Her friends were frustrated, but Azariah defended him, saying, "He's just afraid of losing me. He really cares." Behind the scenes, Cohen's behavior was becoming more controlling. He insisted on knowing where Azariah was at all times. If she went to the store, he'd ask for proof, usually in the form of a photo or a video call. If she went to work, he'd demand updates throughout the day, often bombarding her with texts asking who she was talking to or why she hadn't replied sooner. And when Azariah finally did respond, Cohen's mood could change in an instant. Sometimes he'd apologize for being needy, blaming his behavior on his past relationships. Other times, he'd lash out, accusing her of not taking their relationship seriously. By the end of 2022, the arguments between Cohen and Azariah had become a regular occurrence. Neighbors at Cohen's home in Gloucester City later reported hearing shouting matches late at night. The arguments often began over small issues. Azariah taking too long to respond to a text, or Cohen misinterpreting a social media post. But they quickly escalated into heated confrontations. On one occasion, a neighbor called the police after hearing what sounded like glass shattering during a fight. Azariah insisted that it was a misunderstanding and declined to press charges. It was a pattern that would repeat itself several times in the months to come. Azariah's friends and family began to notice physical signs of the toll the relationship was taking on her. She seemed more withdrawn, less like the vibrant, creative person they knew. Amelie Person, her best friend, remembers a conversation they had in early 2023 that left her deeply concerned. "She showed up at my apartment with a bruise on her arm," Amelie said. "I asked her what happened, and she said she'd bumped into a door. But I didn't believe her. I could see it in her eyes. She was scared." Amelie tried to convince Azariah to leave Cohen, but Azariah wasn't ready to listen. She said he was going through a hard time and that he just needed her support. She really thought she could fix him. By mid-2023, the tension between Cohen and Azariah had reached a breaking point. Cohen's controlling behavior had intensified, and his temper had grown more volatile. Azariah confided in Amelie that Cohen had become physically violent. She described a fight that had occurred in June, during which Cohen grabbed her wrist so hard that it left bruises. "He didn't mean it," Azariah told Amelie. "He was just angry." He apologized afterward and said he'd never do it again. But Amelie wasn't convinced. "I told her, Azariah, this isn't love, this is abuse." But she just shook her head and said I didn't understand. In July 2023, Azariah made a decision that would later prove to be a pivotal moment in her story. During a tearful conversation with Amelie, she admitted that she was scared of Cohen and wanted to leave him. She said she couldn't take it anymore, Amelie recalled. She wanted out, but she didn't know how. She was afraid of how he'd react. Azariah's fears weren't unfounded. Cohen's behavior had become increasingly unpredictable, and his need for control made the idea of her leaving unthinkable to him. Azariah began making plans to move out of Cohen's house, but she kept those plans to herself, fearing what Cohen might do if he found out. She told Amelie that she was trying to save up enough money to get her own apartment and had even started looking at listings online. "She was so determined," Amelie said. "I really thought she was going to get out. I just wish she'd had more time." But time was something Azariah didn't have. As her relationship with Cohen continued to deteriorate, the tension between them reached a boiling point. The events that followed would reveal just how dangerous Cohen had become, and how far he was willing to go to maintain control. On the morning of July 23, 2023, the world around Azariah Stone seemed deceptively normal. The sun rose over Gloucester City as it always did, casting its light on the quiet streets of the neighborhood where she lived with Cohen Donovan. But by the end of that day, a chain of events would begin to unravel. A chain that would leave her loved ones searching for answers, and a young woman's life forever stolen. Azariah was scheduled to open at the small boutique where she worked. It was her usual shift, and she had spoken to her coworker, Indy Frank, the night before to confirm her schedule. But when the store opened that morning, Azariah was nowhere to be found. Her coworkers assumed she had overslept, though this was unlike her. They called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. By the afternoon, when she still hadn't shown up or returned any messages, concern began to grow. Indy described the sinking feeling she had that day. Something just didn't feel right. She wasn't the type to flake, and she always responded to her messages. "I knew in my gut that something was wrong." Azariah's mother, Linda Cantu, received a call from Indy later that evening. At first, Linda wasn't overly alarmed. Azariah had been under a lot of stress lately, and she figured her daughter might just need a break. But when Linda tried to call her and got no answer, worry began to creep in. By the next morning, Azariah's friends and family were in a panic. Her phone was still off, her social media accounts were inactive, and no one had seen or heard from her since the previous day. When Linda reached out to Cohen Donovan, his response was chillingly dismissive. He claimed that Azariah had decided to take some time for herself and that she was probably staying with a friend. "She's fine," Cohen told Linda over the phone. "She just needed to clear her head. She'll be back when she's ready." But something about his tone felt off. Linda later recalled, "He didn't sound worried at all. It was like he was trying to brush me off." As the days turned into weeks, Azariah's disappearance became more and more suspicious. Her friends and family reported her missing to the police, who began an investigation. Cohen continued to insist that she had left voluntarily, even going so far as to tell officers that Azariah had mentioned wanting to get away for a while. But Linda and Amelie, Azariah's best friend, weren't convinced. They knew Azariah wouldn't just vanish without telling someone where she was going. Amelie later said, "She was scared of Cohen, but she was also scared to leave him. If she left, she would have told me." For months, the investigation seemed to stall. Police conducted searches and interviewed neighbors, but there was little evidence to suggest foul play. Cohen continued to live his life as if nothing had happened, though neighbors reported seeing him acting increasingly erratic. One neighbor, Anakin de Jesus, described hearing strange noises coming from Cohen's garage late at night in the days following Azariah's disappearance. "It sounded like he was moving something heavy," Anakin said. "I didn't think much of it at the time, but looking back, it gives me chills." The breakthrough in the case came nearly 5 months later, on December 22, 2023. It was a cold, overcast afternoon when 2 hikers in Belle Plaine State Forest stumbled upon something out of place. Tucked away among the trees was an old, weathered refrigerator. It was wrapped tightly in a sleeping bag and secured with blue ratchet straps. The hikers, curious and unsettled, approached the refrigerator. One of them noticed an unusual smell and decided to open it, thinking it might contain spoiled food or trash. But what they found inside was far more horrifying. Azariah Stone's body lay crumpled within the refrigerator, her lifeless form shrouded in darkness and silence. The hikers immediately called the police, who arrived at the scene within the hour. Investigators noted that the refrigerator appeared to have been abandoned for months, hidden deep in the forest where it would be unlikely to draw attention. The discovery sent shockwaves through the small community of Gloucester City, where news of Azariah's disappearance had faded into the background for many. Now it was front and center again. And this time, it was clear that something far more sinister had taken place. Forensic analysis provided chilling details about Azariah's final moments. The medical examiner determined that she had been strangled, likely during a violent confrontation. Her body showed signs of bruising, suggesting she had fought back against her attacker. After her death, her body had been placed in the refrigerator, which was then transported to Belle Plaine State Forest. Investigators believed the refrigerator had been there since late July, just days after Azariah was last seen. The investigation quickly turned its focus to Cohen Donovan. Suspicion had surrounded him from the start, but now the evidence against him began to pile up. A search of his home uncovered a crucial piece of evidence: a calendar hanging in the kitchen. The days leading up to July 24, 2023, the day after Azariah was last seen, were marked with large X's. Investigators believed this indicated that Cohen had been planning something in the days before Azariah's disappearance. Another key piece of evidence came from security footage obtained from a nearby gas station. The footage, dated July 25, 2023, showed Cohen's green pickup truck driving down the highway. In the back of the truck was a large, rectangular object wrapped in a tarp. Police later confirmed that the object matched the size and shape of the refrigerator found in the forest. This footage, combined with the timeline established by the calendar and witness statements, painted a damning picture of Cohen's involvement in Azariah's death. For Azariah's family and friends, the discovery of her body brought a mix of heartbreak and relief. After months of uncertainty, they finally had answers, but those answers came at an unbearable cost. "She didn't deserve this," her mother, Linda, said through tears. "She was such a beautiful soul. She trusted the wrong person, and he took her from us." Amelie, who had been one of Azariah's closest confidants, added, "I just wish I could have done more. I wish I could have gotten her out sooner." Cohen Donovan, the man who had once professed his love for Azariah, was now the prime suspect in her murder. But this case was far from over. As investigators dug deeper into the evidence, they would uncover even more chilling details about the lengths Cohen had gone to in order to cover his tracks. The question now was not just how Azariah had died, but why, and what would it take to bring her killer to justice. Let me know if this section is complete to your liking, or if you'd like me to expand on anything further before we move on. As the grim discovery of Azariah Stone's body made its way through the media, one name quickly rose to the top of the investigators' list: Cohen Donovan. From the very beginning, he had been the focal point of suspicion. His dismissive attitude toward Azariah's disappearance, the red flags in their toxic relationship, and the mountain of circumstantial evidence tied to the crime all pointed in one direction. But there was one problem. Cohen was nowhere to be found. In early August 2023, just weeks after Azariah was last seen alive, Cohen Donovan abruptly vanished from Gloucester City. Investigators learned that he had withdrawn a significant amount of cash from his bank account and packed a few belongings before leaving his home behind. His green pickup truck, the same one seen transporting the refrigerator to Belle Plaine State Forest, was abandoned in a parking lot near a bus station in southern New Jersey. It didn't take long for law enforcement to confirm what many had already suspected. Cohen was on the run. Investigators began piecing together his escape route, using surveillance footage and tips from witnesses. Cohen had traveled south, crossing state lines into Texas, and eventually slipped into Mexico through a border checkpoint in Brownsville. He had taken great care to avoid leaving a digital trail, using cash for all his transactions and ditching his cell phone to avoid being tracked. By the time authorities realized he had left the country, Cohen was already deep into Mexico, blending into the crowds of bustling cities and remote villages. For weeks, Cohen managed to evade capture. It seemed as though he had vanished without a trace. But while he was physically out of reach, investigators back in New Jersey were far from idle. They combed through his life with a fine-tooth comb, looking for anything that might lead them to his location. They interviewed former coworkers, neighbors, and friends, hoping someone might have a clue about where he had gone. They analyzed his financial records, tracing his movements as far as the border, and put out alerts to international law enforcement agencies. The clock was ticking, and every day that Cohen remained free felt like an insult to Azariah's memory. As the weeks dragged on, investigators began to worry that Cohen might be gone for good. Mexico's vast size and sprawling landscapes offered countless places to hide, and Cohen, it seemed, had no intention of coming back willingly. But on August 27, 2023, a breakthrough came, one that no one had expected. It was Cohen himself who gave authorities their first real lead. Nearly a month after fleeing the United States, he walked into a police station in Mexico City and turned himself in. He appeared disheveled and exhausted, his once carefully maintained image of confidence now replaced by a shadow of desperation. To the officers who took his statement, Cohen claimed he had fled because he was panicked and scared after what he described as a violent altercation with Azariah. According to Cohen's version of events, the night of July 23rd had started with a heated argument between him and Azariah. He claimed that during the fight, things had escalated, and he had lost control. When asked why he hadn't called the police after the incident, Cohen's explanation was simple: fear. He insisted that he hadn't meant to hurt her, but when he realized what had happened, he panicked and made the decision to cover it up. "I didn't know what else to do," he reportedly told authorities. "I wasn't thinking straight." While Cohen's story might have explained his flight, it didn't align with the evidence investigators had uncovered. His actions after Azariah's death, meticulously disposing of her body, wrapping it in a sleeping bag, securing it with ratchet straps, and driving it deep into a forest, painted a picture of calculated intent, not panic. And his decision to flee the country rather than face the consequences further called into question his claims of remorse. The news of Cohen's capture in Mexico City was met with a mixture of relief and outrage back in New Jersey. For Azariah's family, it was a step toward justice, but it also reignited the pain of their loss. "We've waited so long for this," her mother, Linda Cantu, said in an emotional statement. "He took my baby from me, and then he ran like a coward. I just want to see him held accountable for what he did." The process of extraditing Cohen back to the United States was swift. Within days of turning himself in, he was escorted by U.S. Marshals onto a plane bound for New Jersey, where he would finally face the consequences of his actions. As he stepped off the plane, handcuffed and flanked by officers, reporters shouted questions at him. But Cohen remained silent, his expression cold and unreadable. His capture marked the end of one chapter in the case, but the fight for justice was far from over. The legal battle to hold him accountable for Azariah's death was only just beginning. While Cohen Donovan sat in a New Jersey jail cell awaiting trial, investigators continued to work tirelessly to strengthen their case against him. The evidence they had collected, the calendar with the marked dates, the security footage of his truck, and the forensic analysis of the refrigerator, would all play a critical role in the courtroom. But for Azariah's loved ones, no amount of evidence or legal proceedings could ever fill the void her death had left behind. "We just want people to know who she was," her best friend, Amelie Person, said in an interview. She wasn't just a victim. She was a beautiful, kind, and creative soul who deserved so much more than this. Cohen's flight to Mexico was a desperate attempt to escape accountability. But no matter how far he ran, the truth followed him. And now, as the legal system prepared to take its course, one question remained. Would justice truly be served for Azariah Stone? The trial of Cohen Donovan was one that many in New Jersey had been waiting for. It wasn't just about the law. It was about Azariah Stone's memory and the need for answers to the questions that had haunted her loved ones since her disappearance. But as the legal process unfolded, it became clear that this would not be the sweeping, definitive moment of justice that her family had hoped for. Cohen faced 2 formal charges: desecrating human remains and hindering apprehension. Prosecutors laid out the evidence in painstaking detail: the security footage of his green pickup truck transporting the refrigerator, the calendar with the marked dates, and the forensic analysis proving that Azariah's body had been hidden in the forest for months. The story was damning. Cohen had gone to great lengths to cover up the crime, disposing of her body and fleeing the country. But one question lingered at the heart of the case. Was Azariah's death intentional? Despite the overwhelming evidence tying him to the disposal of Azariah's body, prosecutors were unable to charge Cohen with murder. He insisted that her death was the result of an accident, a claim he repeated through his attorney during the trial. Cohen maintained that he and Azariah had argued on the night of July 23rd, and that during the confrontation, he had lost control, but never meant to harm her. Without sufficient physical evidence to prove premeditation, and with no witnesses to contradict Cohen's version of events, the court had little choice but to accept the charges as they stood. In the end, Cohen was convicted of desecrating human remains and hindering apprehension. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison, the maximum penalty allowed under New Jersey law for those charges. For many, the sentence felt woefully inadequate. While Cohen would spend years behind bars, Azariah's loved ones were left with the bitter reality that no one had been held accountable for the act that had taken her life. For Azariah's family and friends, the trial may have brought some measure of closure, but it was far from justice. 15 years isn't enough. Her mother, Linda Cantu, said during a tearful press conference after the verdict. He threw her away like trash. He ran. He hid. And now we're supposed to be okay with him serving just a few years for what he did. It's not right. Azariah's best friend, Amelie Person, echoed those frustrations. It feels like the system failed her, she said. She's gone, and no one is being held responsible for that. He says it was an accident, but everything he did afterward proves he knew exactly what he'd done. Amelie and other friends have since launched a foundation in Azariah's name, aiming to raise awareness about domestic violence and provide resources for women in abusive relationships. If we can help just one person get out before it's too late, then Azariah's death won't have been in vain, Amelie said. Linda has also continued to fight for further investigation into Cohen's role in her daughter's death. She has repeatedly called on law enforcement to reopen the case and pursue additional charges, arguing that the evidence points to far more than an accident. I'll keep fighting until my last breath, Linda said in a public statement. Azariah deserved better, and I'm not going to let her story end here. Azariah Stone's story is not an isolated incident. It is a reflection of a larger, deeply troubling pattern in relationships marked by control and abuse. The signs were there from the beginning. Cohen's possessiveness, his need to isolate Azariah from her friends and family, his manipulative apologies, and, ultimately, his violence. It's a pattern that many victims of domestic abuse face. A slow erosion of independence and self-worth until leaving feels impossible. Experts on domestic violence have pointed out how cases like Azariah's often go unrecognized until it's too late. What we see time and time again is that victims minimize the danger they're in, said Dr. Anakin De Jesus, a psychologist specializing in abusive relationships. They tell themselves things will get better or that their partner didn't mean to hurt them. But by the time they realize the full extent of the danger, they're already trapped. The case also highlights the difficulty of prosecuting crimes involving intimate partner violence. Without witnesses or physical evidence that directly contradicts a perpetrator's claims, prosecutors often struggle to secure convictions for murder or other violent offenses. Cohen's insistence that Azariah's death was an accident, combined with his calculated cover-up, created a legal gray area that left her family without the full justice they deserved. Azariah's story also sheds light on the importance of recognizing the warning signs of abusive relationships. Her friends and family had seen those signs, the isolation, the jealousy, the controlling behavior, but like so many victims, Azariah believed she could change Cohen. She believed he could be better. Her tragic death serves as a reminder of the dangerous consequences of unchecked control and manipulation. In the months following the trial, Azariah's story has become a rallying cry for advocates against domestic violence. Vigils have been held in her honor, and her name has become a symbol for those who feel trapped in abusive relationships. Her mother, Linda, has said that while nothing can bring her daughter back, she hopes Azariah's story will save others. If you're in a situation like Azariah was, please get help, Linda said during a memorial service. Don't wait. Don't hope things will get better. You deserve to be safe. You deserve to be loved. For Azariah's loved ones, the fight for justice is far from over. Cohen Donovan may have been convicted, but for them, the sentence was just the beginning. Their mission now is to ensure that Azariah's life and legacy are remembered, not just as a victim, but as a creative, loving, and vibrant young woman whose light was extinguished far too soon. In the end, Azariah Stone's story is about more than one tragic death. It's a reflection of the silent struggles so many face behind closed doors. It's a call to action for everyone to recognize the signs of abuse and to speak up, to intervene, and to protect those who feel powerless. And it's a reminder that even in the face of injustice, the fight for accountability and change is one worth fighting. Azariah's voice may have been silenced, but her story will continue to be told, because her life mattered. Azariah Stone's life was one filled with love, creativity, and hope for a brighter future. She was more than a victim. She was a daughter, a sister, and a friend. She was someone who saw beauty in the smallest things and had dreams that stretched far beyond the limits of her circumstances. And yet, her life was stolen, not just by one person, but by a cycle of manipulation and abuse that is far too common and far too often ignored. For her family, the pain of her absence is a wound that will never fully heal. Her mother, Linda, still struggles to understand how someone who brought so much light into the world could meet such a dark end. Her best friend, Amelie, carries the weight of the what-ifs, replaying moments and missed opportunities to intervene. And her younger brother, Braylon, still holds onto the memory of the sister who told him bedtime stories to chase away his nightmares. Now, it is their reality that feels like a nightmare, one they are forced to live through every day without her. Azariah's story is a stark reminder of the darkness that can hide behind a charming smile. It is a lesson in the importance of recognizing the warning signs of abuse, the isolation, the control, the gaslighting. These behaviors don't just happen overnight. They are gradual, insidious, and, if left unchecked, they can escalate to devastating consequences. It is a call to action for all of us to pay closer attention, to speak up, and to support those who feel trapped and voiceless. But Azariah's story is also a call for change. Change in how we view and address domestic violence, change in how we hold perpetrators accountable, and change in the way we support survivors. For too long, stories like hers have ended in silence. It's time to break that silence. If you or someone you know is in a dangerous or unhealthy relationship, there is help available. You are not alone. There are people who will listen, who will believe you, and who will help you find safety. Azariah's story didn't have the ending we all hoped for, but maybe, just maybe, her story can save someone else's life. Let that be her legacy. Azariah Stone's light may be gone, but her story lives on as a beacon of hope, a reminder to protect, to advocate, and to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. Let us remember her, not for how she died, but for the beauty, love, and creativity she brought into the world. Her voice was silenced, but her message echoes louder than ever. If you found Azariah's story as impactful as we did, we invite you to join us in raising awareness about the dangers of abusive relationships. Make sure to subscribe to our channel for more stories that shine a light on the hidden truths of the world around us. Together, we can help ensure that stories like Azariah's are never forgotten, and that they continue to inspire change.